He's been an alumnus of Sri Sathya Sai Institute of Higher Learning at Prashantinilayam and was also a faculty member of the Sri Sathya Sai Institute of Higher Learning at Whitefield in Bangalore, and is currently the visiting faculty at Sri Sathya Sai University for Human Excellence at Gulbarga. Shri B.S. Vijay Sai.
Good afternoon and Sairam to one and all. So welcome to the afternoon session of the Global Education Congress. The first speaker for this afternoon is Dr. Tobin Hart, Professor of Psychology in the University of West Georgia and co-founder of the ChildSpirit Institute, USA. Dr. Tobin Hart's work explores human consciousness, especially at the nexus of psychology, spirituality, and education. His recent books include The Four Virtues, The Integrative Mind, Transformative Education for a World on Fire, From Information to Transformation, Education for the Evolution of Consciousness, and The Secret Spiritual World of Children. ChildSpirit Institute is a non-profit educational and research organization to understand and nurture the spirituality in children and adults, run by Dr. Tobin Hart. Over to Dr. Tobin Hart. I would ask you all to note down and ask him questions at the end of the session, which will be moderated.
Thank you. Vijay, honored guests, gracious hosts. It's a privilege to be here. Hi. I wonder if I could ask you a question to begin, or invite you into something. So if you could take a couple deep breaths and settle into your chair, let your chair do its thing, let gravity do its thing, and just take a moment to go inside, if you would. And I wonder if you could bring to mind, bring to heart, someone or something that you love or appreciate. Don't pick them, let them pick you. Just allow them to arise in your consciousness for a moment. Someone or something that you love or appreciate. Might be a child, might be a grandparent, might be a lover, might be a favorite pet, might be Sai Baba. And just bring them into your heart, into your mind for a moment. Okay, and feel what that feels like. Okay, so if you would just turn to your most convenient neighbor, and if there are three of you, don't leave anybody out, just make sure that you take care of each other this way, and maybe only take 30 seconds each and describe whatever you want about that. Maybe it's the person, but particularly it's how that feels. Okay? So go ahead. You got 30 seconds each to describe that. No? No? Yeah, please. Yes, please. Yes. Just another 30 seconds or so. Okay, thank you. You might want to thank your partner. Thank you. I noticed it was a little, the women were much more ready to jump in. The men were a little more reluctant, so I just want to acknowledge your independence and honor that, and also your cooperation and honor that. So that's all right. So you know, we're talking about values this weekend, and there probably isn't anything that's any more foundational than exactly that experience that you just had, maybe, or at least that feeling of love and compassion and warmth and so forth. That's the big motivator, right? That's at the bottom of it. And there's probably no profession that has greater potential to grow that heart, to grow those connections, to grow soul, to grow spirit than education. We particularly are working to grow that soul of the child. But when we get it right, it probably grows our soul as well. When we get it right, we know that this is a reciprocal process. It's a mutual process. When your great joy meets the world's great need, you know you're in the flow. You're in the flow. So anyway, in the next couple days, we're going to hear a variety of ways to talk and think about whatever we call them, values or attributes or capacities or virtues or qualities or spirituality. Remarkably, we already know what they are. Across time, across culture, they're basically the same things, right? It's about what you were just maybe talking about a moment ago, that feeling of love, wisdom, perseverance, courage, those kinds of things. Remarkably, there really isn't any, or rather much disagreement, maybe a little bit here and there, but we really already have that worked out. The bigger challenge is to bring them to life within us, of course, and within the heart of schooling and society. So my question is not really about what we know, about what those qualities are, about what curriculum should be. It's instead about how we know. And part of what I study and look at is human consciousness. I'm a psychologist by training and a therapist originally. And so I'm really interested in how humans think, how they feel, especially consciousness that's big in some way, inspiration, intuition, and how that balances with things like rationality and reason. And so what I want to make a case for, and there's some good evidence for this, is there are really only two ways of knowing, two ways of taking in the world. Only two. There are a lot of other ways to slice this rhetorically, but there are really only two ways of knowing. And so let me put these side by side for a moment. One way is categorical. That is, we put something in a category. The other way makes contact. So categorical knowing, if there's these flowers in front of us, we say, that's a rose. It's efficient, it's important, and we understand it. The other way of knowing is if that rose is in front of us, we smell it, we feel the texture, we imagine what it reminds us of. It allows us to sink deep into the heart of that love, or maybe that romance. That's a different kind of knowing. And essentially, this is it. These are the only two ways that we take in the world. So, some of the other ways. One calculates, the other appreciates. One is objective, one is subjective, your lived experience. One looks at the tree, and the other looks at the forest, parts and wholes. One separates in order to understand, the other connects. One dominates, the other participates in it. One is about information, and the other is about awe. One is about certainty, and the other is about possibility and even mystery. One is about the exterior world, that which we can test and taste and measure, and the other is about the interior. One is about rationality, and the other is about resonance. So both have great value. There's no argument of that. Both ways of knowing and seeing affect how we behave, those values that we embody in the world. But what's happened over the last 400 years is that we've emphasized only one way of knowing, particularly in schooling. That one way of knowing is categorical, it's rational, it's separating, it's reductionistic, it's materialistic, very powerful. Maybe nothing, almost nothing, is more powerful than this. It's responsible for the remarkable technology, the remarkable advances that we've had. And its goal is really quite explicit. So here's Francis Bacon, 400 years ago. Francis Bacon, he articulated inductive reasoning, which is really the basis for the scientific method, for the empirical method. Bacon says this, he says, education is about enlarging the power and empire of mankind over the universe. Enlarging the power and empire of mankind over the universe. René Descartes, also 400 years ago, and partially responsible for this. He says, we have rendered ourselves the lords and possessor of nature. But in gaining that power, we've lost something else. 100 years before Bacon and Descartes, someone from Italy, Leonardo da Vinci, that you may know of, perhaps the greatest or at least the most sought-after artist of his day, and also the most prolific inventor. He was a remarkable polymath. He knew everything there was to know, and he could do almost everything. It was quite stunning. And he saw this coming 100 years before Descartes and Bacon. He saw what was coming on the horizon, and he called it an abbreviator's approach. He called them abbreviators. And what he said, he used often things like a metaphor or an analogy of a tree. And he says that the abbreviators, when noticing a tree, forget its branches, its flowers, the soil that it keeps in place, the animals that it feeds, the home that it serves, in order to see that the tree is good for making planks. It's an abbreviator's approach. And what he says, and this is a quote from him, he says, the abbreviators of works do injury to knowledge and to love. The abbreviators of works do injury to knowledge and to love. This is a remarkable statement, I think. He understood that they were only getting part of the story, right? But it's more than that. It changed the way that they saw the world and ultimately changed the way that they treated the world. Because if the tree is only good for making planks, if the person is only good for making your bread, then you can treat them, the tree, the person, with a level of disconcern, with a level of violence that you couldn't do to something that you made contact with. So again, the abbreviators of works do injury. This, we see things as we are. That is, we see the world through our own filters. And so what Da Vinci and other folks have been talking about is a way of seeing that opens the world in a new way. And this we could call, for example, the Sufis call something knowledge by presence. Knowledge by presence. And by this, what they mean initially is they say, look, even spiritual experience can be encrypted in words. Even spiritual experience can be captured in words. But it takes something to be able to break the code. So, for example, in almost all the world's texts, the sacred texts, the Bhagavad Gita, the Quran, the Bible, that most visitors to those, most readers are invited to go back to the texts again and again and again, so that to see what new light might be available this time. It's because these words are encrypted, encoded. The question is, how do you break the code? How do you break the code? It's knowledge by presence. It's this idea that the code is broken, the book is opened, the secrets are revealed exclusively only through a corresponding opening within you. The extent to which you open to it is the extent to which it opens to you. This is like a two-headed key that fits into a series of locks simultaneously into the other and into the self. And so, whether it's a holy book or a biology textbook or the text that is the person that you're meeting in front of you or the text that's nature at large, doesn't make any difference. The other opens to you only to the extent that you're able to open to it. Knowledge by presence. So, this other knowing that's dominated the last 400 years and certainly has dominated all of education that's westerly influenced, including education adopted from English system, for example, has a consequence, as we've said. So I live outside of Atlanta in Georgia in the United States. My youngest daughter is a second grade teacher, about a mile from one of our Atlanta heroes, Martin Luther King Jr. You know Martin Luther King Jr.? He was a tremendous advocate for civil rights and particularly gave African Americans not only hope but transformation in the society. And I don't know if you know, but one of Martin Luther King Jr.'s heroes himself was Mahatma Gandhi. And so this is what King says. King says, this educational approach, this way of knowing that we've been doing leads inevitably to a dead-end street in an intellectually senseless world. Science can give us only physical power, which if not controlled by spiritual power, will lead inevitably to cosmic doom. The old evils continue and the age of reason has been transformed into an age of terror. Selfishness and hatred have not vanished with an enlargement of our educational system or policies. This is not an argument against science. It's not an argument against reason. It's not an argument against anything like that. It's a question of balance. And if we want values, we have to actually change the way that we know, I argue. Again, for all its phenomenal achievement, this detached knowing is simply incomplete, that's all. The way we know has moral consequences. As Da Vinci said, we do injury to both knowledge and to love. And this kind of knowing that we usually learn doesn't teach the most significant aspects of life. So these two knowings are not unfamiliar. So in Chinese philosophy and medicine, you're familiar with yin and yang, these two poles, masculine and feminine, dark and light, shadow and light. valley, and mountain. This represents the same thing, I would argue. In yogic philosophy, Ida and Pingala represents these two channels on either side of the spine. And one from the bottom, one from the top, and when they're in harmonious alignment, when these two ways are in synchronization, the third channel, right, Sushumna, opens, and we become the conduit for the divine, essentially, for all of the life force. The double helix of the DNA also represents these two dimensions. Contemporary neuroscience also gives us remarkably credible, hard, left side evidence that the two radically segregated and separated hemispheres of the brain actually approach the world, see the world, recognize things in exactly the two ways that I've described: categorical and contact, precise systems, embodied abstract, this kind of thing. So the right hemisphere is particularly good at embodiment, at making contact, at the whole picture. The left simply is good at precision, at logic, at linearity. So these two ways of knowing, again, are recognized even in ancient yogic tradition, I would argue. One could argue. But again, what has happened both personally and societally is we're entirely out of balance. So at this moment in history, we're being called, I would argue, to a new level of understanding. It's not what we know that's so important. And we heard a little bit of that this morning. It's instead how we know that I would argue is part of the secret to these values. And the way to do this is, so for example, a German philosopher Goethe says, to find yourself in the infinite, you have to distinguish and then unite. That one side, and in fact the last 400 years has been about distinguishing. It's taking apart. We're at an age of information, but really what the horizon is an age of integration. It's time to put the parts back together. It's time to recognize both the tree and the forest. That's the value. Part of what this does is to rejoin knowing and being. What's happened with contact, with category, with this one knowing, is it's separated us. We're detached, we're abstract, we're apart from. We don't live it anymore. It's apart from. We have to have the other side in order to rejoin knowing and being. What Tagore says the way to do this is to develop the sensitiveness of the soul. Krishnamurti says it this way: you have to have a feeling for life. That's what's been missing. So what we propose is a pedagogy of presence, an epistemology of resonance, a more intimate empiricism. And ultimately the goal is to move from seeing the world as a collection of objects to experiencing it as a communion of subjects, a living universe. And as soon as that happens, the values fall naturally out of that experience. We're so far away, we're talking about contact and embodiment, and I'm way up here from you, so my apologies.
Good afternoon, Tobin. This is Venkatesh here. My question is, you're talking about 5 ways to know for the values, and at what age, do you think, we start understanding to know about these values in a child?
So it's a little hard to hear, so I'm going to repeat it and see if
He's
I get it.
asking about...
Yeah, go ahead. So, yeah.
What age do we have these values to children? Talked of the 5 values.
Yeah.
5 ways of knowing.
5 ways of learning.
Yeah. So I have a friend who is having great difficulty. She was going through a divorce. She was at an American Thanksgiving party, and she found her way in the back of a house in a room, and she just, her life seemed to be collapsing, and so she just was crying. She was just crying by herself in the room. And all of a sudden she realizes that a small child, about 18 months old, maybe 20 months old, who lived in the house, walked in the room. And the child came up and just put the child's hand on her arm. And she felt this current go through her. And in that moment, she never had a doubt of the power of a loving gaze, a loving touch, even in a child. And in fact, what we know about children is that they're already compassionate. They're already emotionally resonant. If one child cries in a room, infants will cry too. This is emotional contagion. That's not necessarily empathy where we understand the other, but it is this connection, and it is the seed for this. So that's one part of it. So actually I think that these capacities are inborn. I think our humanity, what the Greeks called our humanitas, is already there. We're already spiritual beings, but they need refinement. They need work. And so, again, I think they start very, very early. It's just age-appropriate things. So, for example, one of the things we work on and have worked on with schools is contemplation. So what does contemplation, meditation, whatever, look like for a 3-year-old? Well, one of the things, or a 5-year-old, one of the things we realize is that often children, like the girl who was in the water, they enter into contemplative states spontaneously sometimes. So rather than simply impose a new system of, let's say, meditation on them, we might instead have a dialogue about what they do naturally, ways that they find themselves in their safe place or in their loving place or where they know other things. This girl who is the teacher and her sister, who also works in service in this way, both taught me about their childhood experience when they were 4 and 6. So I'm sold on children as spiritual beings who need our help. You know, they can also be tremendously selfish, right? It's and naive in ways to the world.
So, Dr. Hart, you mean to say that there's no age to begin these 5 values you talk about?
Oh, I think they're there already. Yes. But again, it's not for us to simply say, you'll find it on your own. It requires, there are lots of influences, we know, right? So it requires, our engagement sensibly. Yeah.
Here in the second row.
Namaste ji, Tobin Hart ji. Myself, Dr. Kshirisagar. I don't know exactly how do we define spirituality. That depends. Depends from custom to custom, tradition to tradition, and even godliness, mind power, and etc. The question is, when we mean spirituality, can we bring really spirituality within the context of scientific principles? If we could succeed in that, many suppositions, understandings may dispel, and we may really get to know what godly powers are going to be. So I shall be pleased to know from you what exactly spirituality you mean, or what is the total coverage under spirituality, and would it not be possible for us to have spirituality within the frame of scientific principles? Thank you.
Can you help? Yeah.
Spirituality within the bounds of scientific, he's asking about that. It's actually echoing here. We can hear more in the audience than here. If you could please repeat your question once more. I realize if you could cut the bass, requesting the mic to cut the bass.
I think let me try to repeat your question first,
Yeah,
and you
I
tell
shall,
us.
I shall, I
So the first part of the question, I think, was
First of all, what do you exactly understand by spirituality?
spirituality.
What do you
I
mean by it?
Yeah.
Because the meaning is not same.
What
And
do you
unless
mean
we
by
have-
spirituality?
Yeah.
Yes.
And secondly, if at all you have a particular meaning about spirituality, how can we bring spirituality within this scientific context? That is within the premise of scientific principles. Have you followed? Thank you.
Yes. So again, what is spirituality, and then how do we
Bring it in a scientific context.
within the context of scientific principles, how do we make sense of or explore spirituality in that context? Is that right? Yeah, close enough? Yeah? Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, okay. So, yeah, spirituality is too big for an answer. You know, it doesn't fit neatly in an answer, right? We think about it in terms of transcendence and immanence. It depends on the tradition a lot of times. We think of it as a quest for meaning, for value, for love. It usually comes down to things like this. So spirituality is this quest to really be as big as we are, you know, as big as we can be in some way, and to go past. So the traditions usually either have a transcendent dimension, you know, where, for example, in Christian faith, typically, it's a kind of ascender's look. It's up there, you go there. In the East, sometimes it's more a descender's look. That is, that all things are infused with the Spirit. In Japanese, it's the kami. You know, so you know, this is part of how the world talks about it. Is it up there? Is it there? Well, it's both, right? And it's all of it, and it's more than we can name. As a human, though, I feel like, you know, it is that. Krishnamurti said it's this fire within that we feel, right? It's this push for something greater than ourselves, and it is at a very human level this quest for meaning and for connection, profound connection, not just the connection between us, but for profound homecoming. It's a remembrance sometimes. It's a recognition, right? So anyway, that's part of it, I think. But again, it's too big. Who knows, you know, how to name it. But but if we're going to look at it in terms of science, we have to operationalize it, right? You have to. You can't look at it through a scientific lens without operationalizing what we mean. So we might say, okay, it's about a quest for meaning, or it is about experiences of love in some way, that kind of thing. So it's very, very tricky. In fact, the largest academic prize in the world is not the Nobel Prize, it's the Templeton Prize. And the Templeton Prize is the integration of science and spirituality. And it's very interesting to look at folks that are trying to articulate these worlds. These worlds have been radically segregated for 400 years. They haven't been separated, they've been segregated so that they could not have a dialogue between them. You know, Descartes split these this way. So now the challenge is, well, exactly as you say, how do we bring these together? How can these complement each other? And how can they even intersperse in each other? So it's a wonderful question. I don't have an easy answer for it, but it's exactly the edge. Remember, you know, we're in an age of information, but it's an age of integration. The horizon is exactly to do what you're suggesting. How do we bring these and have meaningful dialogue together? Not just, well, that's spiritual and that's science, and they can't talk to each other. We're trying to figure that out. So, yeah.
Yes, sir.
Excuse me. Mr. Tobin. Good afternoon. This is Dr. Raghu. Is there any possibility of bridging neurosciences or neurochemistry rather into knowledge by presence? How to bridge neurochemistry and knowledge by presence? New age idea of human evolution. How to bridge neurochemistry and knowledge by presence?
how to bridge neurochemistry and
Knowledge by presence. Knowledge by presence.
okay, yeah. Well, yeah, it's a great question, you know. One of the ways that neuroscientists do this is to actually look at the neurochemical or neuroanatomical in some other way signatures when folks are in presence or in empathy or in a transcendent state or in creativity. So this is a scientific approach called neurophenomenology, in which you're actually getting neurological data at the same time that you're having phenomenological data about the lived experience, particularly of some of these radical places. So that would be one way of sort of getting in to the question. I'm not sure if you meant exactly that, but that would be a way of bringing that neurophenomenology. Yeah. Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah.
Yeah. The lady's side, Sister Sheila has a question. That the mic be passed to the lady's side, please. Okay.
I have a question. Thank you very much, Dr. Tobin, Hart. In fact, you have given us wonderful lecture. So my question is, during the course of your lecture, you said, imagination is the bridge from known to unknown. Okay, am I right?
Say it again, imagination.
You said, imagination is the bridge from known to unknown. Okay. And,
imagination is a bridge from known to unknown.
This is the statement made by you. Even I do agree with that. And even it said that imaginations are in fact more powerful than the reality. So basically I'm the teacher. I teach in school. So could you please tell me a few ways how could we develop this imagination among the students? How can we develop to imagine in a very better and the most powerful way among the children?
How to help the children develop imagination, which is a bridge from the known to the unknown.
Yeah, so two things to say about that. One of them, the first one is that there's something called the mundus imaginalis, the imaginal world. And this isn't just described in the literature as my imagination. It's instead described as the world of the image, as another layer of consciousness. It's what David Bohm, the great physicist, quantum physicist, called the implicate order. It's not it's not unreal, it's differently real than what we're seeing right now. And so Bohm and some other folks argue that this tapping into this other imaginal realm through the image, through symbols, this kind of thing, actually taps closer to the spiritual root of things. So when a great artist, for example, has inspiration, one argues in this model that they actually are tapping some deep root. They're tapping something deep, and they're forced to make the art, right? They can't leave it alone. It's compelling them. They're possessed almost by it. So anyway, so just to make a distinction that we can make our individual, we can talk about our cultivating individual imagination, but we can also cultivate this imaginal depth, this other realm that may have an access point, a portal, a gateway that's very interesting. And images often do that. They stimulate, they send a ping into us that something else is happening. So anyway, just for children, their imagination is already going crazy. The trouble isn't how do we make them more imaginative. It's instead, let's stop stopping them from being imagination. It's let's welcome those questions. Usually in school, our goal is one right answer. Not to ask questions, not to have multiple answers, but instead one right answer. And that, more than anything, shuts down the imaginative world because we've truncated our experience. rather than sort of generating possibilities. So again, it's simply inviting the student to do what they do naturally, particularly young students, I think. And of course, there are other ways too. You know, when you tell a story, suddenly it's no longer a list, it's a story. And that stimulates the imagination. Or as you're telling a story, you might ask a question. And rather than the question being having a definitive answer, so how many rocks did Vijay pick up today? The question instead might be, I wonder what Vijay is going to do with those 3 rocks. I wonder whether those rocks wanted to be picked up. I wonder if those rocks have friends. I wonder. So that phrase, I wonder, that sentence stem is an incredibly powerful way of inviting the imagination in an instant. I wonder. And then it invites the children to wonder in the same way.
So, Doctor, what you mean to say is that you got to the child to move from linear to non-linear,
Yeah.
more into wonder,
Yeah.
because they naturally have imagination that faculty would develop. That's the summary. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, Sheila.
Yeah. Thank you, Doctor, for sharing with us great insights. There were a couple of questions I think I'd just like to add to the explanations and the questions. One of the question was that how do we encourage children to apply the 5 modes of knowing? And the question, your answer was, well, they already know. I think I would like to just add this story as a personal experience. I think they not only already know, they already use those 5 gateways, and our modern society's conditioning shut them down one by one. So by the time they're 8 or 10 or 12, we want to teach them to open the gateways. Actually, we don't need to teach them to open anything. They're all open, and in practice, if you look at them at 1 or 2, they are already displaying all those characteristics. By the time they're 6, they become socially conscious. Then the stereotyping gets in, the prejudices set in, and then they close down, and the 5 gateways are pretty much closed or just a narrow hole. I have a simple story that makes this very poignant. My son and a neighbor's child had to go for a science exhibition, and we were carpooling. So we volunteered to drive them there, and the other parent would drive them back. On the way, I had to pick up a secretary who works in my office because her car broke down. So she's Chinese. The girl that we are giving a lift to was Chinese, so Oriental, yellow skin Chinese. Of course, we're Indian. And my son was at the back of the car. Then we picked this friend. They were 3 years old. So this girl sits in. She gets into the car, and then we drive along, and then we pick an adult Chinese secretary in my office. She gets into the car, and she turns around, smiles, greet these 2 children at the back seat, and she asks the little girl, and there was another boy who was my son's friend who was in the car as well. He was Chinese. So 3 kids at the back of the car. A Chinese boy and my son, and then we picked up this Chinese girl who we had to give a lift, all 3-year-olds or 4-year-old, and then this adult person gets into the car. Simple conversation, and then she turns around and asks the little girl, "Is that your brother?" Very harmless conversation. They were just saying good morning. And she just asks that little girl, "Is that your brother?" And for all the adults in the car, we immediately knew she was referring to the Chinese boy, right? If you were sitting in the car, my husband, we knew she was asking the Chinese girl if that Chinese boy in the back seat sitting between her and my son was her brother. This little 3-year-old turned around, looking really startled, and asked her, "Which one?" Okay, and to me, that was an incredible personal growth experience, because it didn't occur to me she could have meant someone else because of my conditioning. Because I knew Chinese were yellow, Oriental, and if she had a biological brother, it had to be Chinese, Oriental, yellow, right? Because all that triggers our thought processes. But to this 3-year-old, she just said, "Which one?" Because she said, "Is that your brother?" And she said, "Which one?" So here's an Indian guy and there's a Chinese guy, and the little girl didn't know who you were referring to. So it is the conditioning that we give them that then they evolve into to realize, oh, you meant the Oriental guy with the yellow skin. Oh, obviously he's not my biological brother, or he's a friend. So
Thank you.
Yeah, I think
Thank you for sharing.
yeah, that was the main one. Another quick statement was the fact that you had asked the question about trying to streamline science and spirituality. It's a personal passion, and I actually collect data. There is a lot of scientific evidence out there that actually affirms a lot of the spiritual lessons. You have neuroscientists who have been brain dead, who've come back, and there are YouTubes about him saying, I'm clinically dead, but I experienced this, so there must be something more than just the brain. There are studies about past lives, people describing...
Sister, we need to cut it short.
Yeah, sorry. People describing previous lives in other places. So please look up and use that data to unify science and spirituality, and I'm sure we'll find all the data we need. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sister. Thank you. Dr. Hart, one of the participants on the event, they asked me a question to ask you, and we'll close this as the last question because we have Professor Mirian Vilela who's waiting to speak next. When you said that the body registers before the mind, but most of us think that emotions are more mental than physical. Could you just explain how do we cultivate that in people? Because I think because of conditioning, we are cutting that particular feeling in the children already.
Yeah, again, it's. Do you want to stand up for a minute? Speaking of the body, you want to stand up right now?
Requesting all of you to stand up for a moment.
Just stand up and we'll be...
He's trying to show us about how the body registers before the mind.
Yeah, well, I'm not really, but your butts were sore probably, so again, in 1 minute, about 120 years ago, William James proposed this theory that, in fact, the body registers first. And now we have lots of neuroscientific evidence that, for example, galvanic skin response, you'll register something before it actually happens in many cases. You'll have brainwave patterns before someone tells you something in many cases, and certainly before you register a thought about it. So it's simply some good basic science that demonstrates you're having a physiological reaction before you get to a place of making a mental construct about it. Thinking slow in this sense is that, okay, this just happened, I'm feeling this, I'm making sense of this, but the body already has responded. And therefore, the extent to which you can open awareness to the body, again, that feeling for, as Krishnamurti said, will give you a more robust sort of sense of knowing. And there's, again, incredible evidence of this. It's very basic, very, very convincing. So you want to move for a minute? You need to move? Yeah. So maybe we'll end there? Yeah?
Thank you.
Is that okay? Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Tobin Hart. One moment, Doctor. I now request Commander Jairam, the Director of Training and Leadership Development, Sri Sathya Sai University of Human Development, to offer a token of our gratitude to Dr. Tobin Hart.
Wake after lunch, too. I know it's
Thank you, Doctor. So we have our next speaker, Professor Mirian Vilela. And even before we have Professor Mirian Vilela, I would like to check the pulse of the audience. I notice, talking of consciousness in the middle of the post-noon session, post-lunch, is making many of you go to a state of unconsciousness naturally. Are you all awake? I don't hear it enough. So, can we give a big round of applause for the previous speaker? Let's do it as... Let's applaud in an organized way so that it wakes us up. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Come on. 1, 2, 3. Can you all stand up and do this once more? Come on. So we all stay awake. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Once more, please. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Okay. Thank you very much. Please be seated. So probably I need to request people sitting on your side to see that you make the body feel more than the mind, probably gently pinching the other person if he's losing his consciousness. Should we do that? Okay. So to the next speaker, we have Professor Mirian Vilela. She's the Executive Director, Earth Charter International Secretariat, and the Earth Charter Center for Education for Sustainable Development at the University for Peace, Costa Rica. Earth Charter is a model to foster a sustainable future by integrating knowledge, values, and skills into education, lifelong learning, and planning. Ms. Vilela is a professor at the University for Peace and coordinates the UNESCO Chair on Education for Sustainable Development with the Earth Charter. She has been in the leadership of Earth Charter initiative since January 1996, and for more than 23 years, she has facilitated multicultural and multi-sectoral workshops, courses, and dialogues related to sustainability, values, and education. Over to Professor Mirian Vilela from Costa Rica.
Vijay. You didn't hear me. Good afternoon. I'm very honored to be here. And I thank the organizers for the invitation. I would like to ask for the mic that helps me to move, talking about the body. Can you? Yes, thank you.
You'd like this mic?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Yes.
I'm just trying to follow what we just heard from Tobin. That's nice to use the body also in terms of embodied learning. Anyway, thank you so much for the invitation. I'm honored to be here and to speak before you. I feel honored and humble, actually. I have a special attachment to India. I was born in Brazil, in Brasilia, the capital. And I was born and raised in Brazil, but I have some special affection with India. When I hear about an opportunity to come to India, my heart smiles. It's a deep sense of connection, actually, that I feel sincerely. So today, my intention is to share with you a little bit about the work we do with the Earth Charter. My intention is for you at the end of today to have an idea of what the Earth Charter is, but also a little bit of the work of the UNESCO chair that I coordinate. I'll try to speak from here. Okay, I would like to start by sharing something about Brazil, because that's where I come from. And what comes to my mind is in 1888, slavery was abolished in Brazil. So I come from a country that has a very long history of a country that perceived slavery as something normal. It was normal. It was legal. It was normal. And what comes to my mind is what happens with some people that look at a tradition and has the guts and dares to say it's tradition, it's acceptable, but that's not normal. What do we have to have as a human being to dare to go against the current, even if it's a cultural norm? And how can we instill in people that courage to stand up and say, well, it's normal, it's accepted, but that's not fair, it's not good, and really have that courage? How can we instill in ourselves, and of course in our students, that courage to stand up and question our assumptions, even question our most traditional values, the values of my family. My family has eaten in a certain way. My family has taught me to do things in a certain way. My country, my people have taught me to do things in a certain way because that's what was kind of right. And what do we have to question those assumptions? So I think about those people back in 1850 that lived in Brazil around that time, that really dared to stand up and say, slavery, it's legal, but it's not right. And I come to our generation now, in terms of worldview. We live in a world that sees a number of things as normal. And what are those things that we could question nowadays and really enhance the capacity of young people, of children, but also of adults to stand up and say, well, it's time for our generation to change the way things are, change the way, the path, set our generation into a new direction. So another example is we may come to so for instance, 50, 60 years ago in Brazil, it was normal not to have electricity in most places that were not the capital. But there was a generation of people who said, no, it's important to bring energy. So it's kind of a generation that took that in their hands. So I share this because I think what is in our hands now, in the hands of our generation, not just the children, what the children should do, but what we can do. We as teachers, as mothers, as fathers, as young people, yes, we as teachers or principals of schools, what do we have in our hands in terms of challenge to change the current worldview, assumptions, or traditions? And I think a lot of that comes from our deep beliefs and values. So I'm going to share a little bit with you about the work we do in terms of cultivating, nurturing, not infusing, not inculcating, but cultivating, nurturing values of sustainability and global citizenship through the lenses of the Earth Charter. I'll give you an overview and some insights of research we have been doing. But in terms of cultivating values of sustainability, we live in a world that is unsustainable. We live in a world that we can see in many ways that is actually going against the idea of global citizenship, or let's call Earth community, one Earth family, because we are kind of looking at the resources and how we can protect our resources against the others, right? So we live in a world that it's actually preaching pretty much a culture of unsustainability. And we see that everywhere, on the TV, in the news, in the conversations, in the way adolescents or teenagers dress and measure themselves, and how we measure success, actually. So do we dare to question that modus operandi, or question that mindset of unsustainability, that mindset of separation that someone put in our minds at some point in terms of we are not one Earth community. Yeah? So the work we do, we have established a UNESCO chair in 2012 at the University for Peace that is based in Costa Rica. And there are many UNESCO chairs around the world, but each UNESCO chair has a specific focus. So therefore, each one is unique in its own way. Our UNESCO chair is really looking at that intersection that you see there. The intersection between sustainability, values, and how to bring that into education. How to incorporate the values of sustainability into education in a way that is really from a transformative learning approach. So the nexus of those three spheres that you see on your screen is really the focus of the work we do. So I come back to the question about in 1850, around the 1850 in Brazil, if the education system around that time would help people to think that slavery was okay. Probably yes, they wouldn't question that. They didn't learn that in school. So if we bring back to nowadays, the question is the current education system, in general, mainstream education system, helping to perpetuate the current paradigm of unsustainability? And I dare to think that probably yes. We have a lot of engineers, lawyers, MBAs, business people, entrepreneurs, that have a lot of education, PhDs and masters, and are committing a lot of mistakes that are generating a huge impact in our society, right? Social impact, environment impact. Just 2 months ago, actually in January, in Brazil, a huge dam with a lot of chemicals, a dam full of mud that was kind of the waste of a mining processing, broke and contaminated kilometers of land and water, and that killed people. The question here is that dam was built by the best engineers. The company was managed by the best MBAs. So it's very scary. I think in terms of world history, we are living in a time that people have had more access to education. We have less illiterate people. We have more people with access to education, more people with masters and universities than ever before. Despite of that, we have many well-educated people that are making a lot of decisions that have a huge negative impact in our communities and in the world. Why is that? So probably that the education system is not really helping much to nurture a mindset of care, responsibility with the decisions that we have and etc. Let me go to the next question that I have here. Can I have, okay. So is the current education system, let's see. The next question is, and if someone can help me with the, okay. Is the current education system helping to perpetuate the current paradigm of unsustainability in our societies? Or is the current education system cultivating a culture of care, a culture of respect, care and respect for the large living world? Maybe we could say, well, my school, my university is helping to generate citizens that care for other citizens of our country, of our community, not citizens of another region, culture. Or the idea of cultivating care and respect for the non-human living world, it's not part of our agenda. We have other things to do. So it's really, I think, our education system, mainstream education system, is far from really putting this quest for a culture of care and respect for the large and living world as the core of our upbringing. Let's go to the next question that I would like just to share with you. I'll pause. My friends there can maybe help, because this is not working. Okay, what values do you think are embedded and taught in the process of teaching and learning in the mainstream education? What are the values that are influencing and guiding our lifestyles, and where do they come from? What are the values that are influencing the worldview of our children, our youth, and adults of our communities? I tend to think that it's really not the values of a more caring world or a more sustainable world, or values that are around this notion of Earth community. Let me go. I'm trying to move it forward. So given that we believe that values-based education and values-based education from the lenses of sustainability is so important, from the lenses of global citizenship is so important, how we ought to incorporate the values and ethics and principles of sustainability and global citizenships in process of teaching and learning. And so let's go next. Okay, so I start with those questions to stimulate our thoughts, your thoughts. I have been thinking about this for the past many years. And one interesting thing that is happening is that there's a number of new policies, education policies around the UN, so it's kind of international policies, that is actually kind of opening the doors for what we are doing here. And I think we all share the common, if we are here, is because we share a common interest in values-based education, right? So I just wanted to bring to your attention, so you may have heard about the Sustainable Development Goal. Can you raise your hand if you are aware of the Sustainable Development Goals? So we have a number of people in the room. Okay, so the Sustainable Development Goals is the new agenda that the United Nations set up as priorities that international community should have in terms of goals between the 2015 and goals should be achieved in 2030. So this is not just the UN and government's agenda, but the UN is really making an effort to engage universities, schools, business. So it's the buzzword, so many people are talking about how to implement the Sustainable Development Goals. So that's very general. There are 17 Sustainable Development Goals. One of them is on education. So it's on the SDG 4 is on education, quality education. The interesting thing here is that over the past 30 to 40 years, the UN has, actually UNESCO has organized the education agenda around a common agenda for priorities in terms of the where global education should be heading. The first one was around, I think, 1992 or 1990 in Jutien. There was another one in Dakar. You might have heard about the Dakar education agenda, was in the year 2000. And the main goal of that was to shrink illiteracy around the world. So the goal was how to overcome that world challenge. And in 2015, in Korea, the UN had the last global conference on education that set the goals of policy making around education for the next following 15 years. Okay, Let me see if I can make this work. I have to go back if someone is there helping me, because it seems that this is back. Okay. So why am I sharing this with you? Very briefly. It's because there is an interesting opportunity at the policy-making level. We are here talking about how important is transformative learning, about values-based education. I come from a world of education for sustainability. But the UN has, UNESCO came together in 2015 and set up this new education framework. It's called Education 2030. So if you want to learn more about it, there's a lot of information from the UNESCO on it. It's called the New Education Framework that has a kind of a target towards 2030 to transform the education systems around quality education. But an important thing here is that there are two important basis of that approach is education for sustainable development, education for global citizenship. That UNESCO is really, the governments that came together around UNESCO agreed upon that agenda and committed to implement or to reorient education towards sustainability and to reorient education towards global citizenship. So that's the UNESCO and UN policy around education. And as part of that, there's a lot of words about values, the importance to incorporate values in education. And that's why I'm sharing this with you, because it's a commitment of all our governments, so the Indian government, the Malaysian government, the Brazilian government, Australian government, UK government, that go to this international forum of the UN, agree on a common agenda of priorities, and they have agreed on that new education global agenda towards 2030, around the SDG 4, so the Sustainable Development Goal 4. The interesting thing is that I want to show you, if I can. Can you help me to move on the... So what does it say around global citizenship education? So the UN has a specific interest, UNESCO has been having a specific interest in promoting education for global citizenship or global citizenship education. And that aims at to equip learners with a deep knowledge of global issues, universal values, such as justice, equality, dignity, and respect. Global citizenship education aims also to equip learners with cognitive skills to think critically, systemically, creatively, including adopting a multi-perspective approach, and etc. Equip learners with non-cognitive skills, social skills such as empathy and conflict resolution, and behavioral capacity to act collaborative, and etc. This comes from a UNESCO document from 2013. I'm just sharing this with you so that you can see the language in the international policy making of UN in education that is really kind of opening windows. Let's go next. So the previous one was, what does it say around education for global citizenship? This one is about education for sustainable development. So what is UNESCO and UN, governments and etc., saying about education for sustainable development? They say that education for sustainable development consists in educating to generate social transformation with the objective to create more sustainable societies. So the goal of the UNESCO agenda around ESD, or Education for Sustainable Development effort, is to incorporate the values inherent to sustainability in all aspects of learning. So this comes again from UNESCO documents, is infused in international policy making around the UN, and governments have committed to do that. I suppose, so actually this year, 2019, governments are looking at what they have already done since 2015 and now. around the implementation of this. The issue is that teachers are not trained to do this. So governments go, they agree on these international policies, and unless you have a very interested teacher or school principal to go and search, it takes 5 decades for this to really go inside the classroom. So I'm sharing this because I think it's quite interesting to see how at the international policy making this language has evolved. The question is, what are the values that are inherent to sustainability? Because they say we should incorporate values that are inherent to sustainability in all aspects of learning. So primary schools, secondary schools, higher education. That's what the UN is pushing for, right? But it's very hard to equip teachers with the knowledge, with the experience and how to do. Of course, there's no recipe for that either. Let's just go back 1 second. Okay, so in terms of to answer that question of what are those values, so in 2014, with UNESCO, we put together that publication that you have there. So I think it's called Exploring, I can't even remember the name of it, but it's Exploring Faith-Based Values and the relationship with that and sustainability. So what that publication did was we invited voices from different religious traditions. The Islamic world, many different Christians' voices. Christians, Hindus, Islamic traditions, Buddhists, to reflect and try to identify what are the traditional values that are embedded in their religious traditions, and try to identify how those values relate to sustainability values. And it's quite interesting that all those voices, from Hindus to Jains and Christians, have a lot of similarities, a lot of commonalities in terms of their traditional values. And one of them is the notion of interconnectedness, the importance and the notion of interconnectedness that is found in the Muslim world and in the Christian world and in the mindset of all the different religions. So the publication was there to find synergies, to make bridges between the different religious traditions and the values of sustainability. And we actually found a lot of commonality. So UNESCO has been promoting this notion of embedding education for sustainability through school, through university, through the lenses of a whole institutional approach. Can we see here? Okay, so the whole institutional approach is really inviting educational institutions to infuse the values of sustainability and global citizenship into the content of the curriculum, into the pedagogy, the way we do things. So one is what, the other one is how. Through the operation, the management of the school, the management of the university, the way we organize the physical space, and how the school relates to the community. So the UN and UNESCO has been promoting this approach of whole institutional approach of education for sustainability, so that it's not only infused in the curriculum, but also the way in which education for sustainable development has to be implemented needs to be done in a different way, in a transformative way, in a participatory way, and etc. So the idea here is to infuse the notion of sustainability and global citizenship in the culture of the education institution, no? In the culture of, in the ethos. So the idea is to transform the institutional ethos to embrace the values of sustainability and global citizenship. Again, not just, you cannot be just teaching, but you have to reflect those values in the operations, in the way the schools is managed, the way the school is organized, the physical space, and so forth. So, what does UNESCO say about ESD? What is it envisioned? They envision ESD, Education for Sustainability, as something that we should help us to reorient our curriculum to address sustainability, our educational communities, because they say the education communities need to identify the knowledge, issues, perspectives, skills, and values that are central to sustainable development and integrate them into the curriculum. So the question is, what are the sustainability values and what are the global citizenship values? So the Earth Charter has been considered by UNESCO as a framework, as an ethical framework, as an instrument that articulates the values and principles of sustainability and global citizenship, and as an instrument that can be used for values clarification, for values examination. This was done through a UNESCO resolution. So there was a UNESCO resolution in 2003. UNESCO adopted this resolution in which they recognized the Earth Charter as an important educational instrument that articulates those values and to be used as an educational instrument. So let me quickly share with you what is the Earth Charter, where it comes from. So the Earth Charter is actually a document that the idea of that emerged back in the 80s. It emerged as a UN process, as a United Nations process around the Sustainable Development Agenda. And there was a recommendation for the need for a new charter that could guide humanity towards a more sustainable future. So the process was part of the 92 Earth Summit to draft the Earth Charter. It emerged out of that. And during the whole decade of the 90s, there was a number of studies and consultations and drafting to come up with those values and principles that humanity shares. So for that to happen, there were people from different religions, people from different areas of knowledge, so experts in international law, scientists, different faith groups, indigenous people that came together to try to identify what were those values and principles. So the result is, their Charter is the result of that conversation, that consultation and dialogue. But the Earth Charter is also a global movement that involves individuals and organizations from around the world, from all continents, that have embraced the Earth Charter as an instrument, as an ethical reference that can guide them and us towards sustainability. And we also have an institution that is based in Costa Rica that is working pretty much on education. So a little bit about the content of the Earth Charter. As an ethical framework, it's very important to start by saying it has a systemic nature of it. That all the different parts of the Earth Charter, they are all interdependent. So the Earth Charter, it has a preamble, it has 16 principles organized in 4 parts. At the core of it is an ethic of care and respect. Care and respect for what? Is it for human beings alone? No, the idea here was to articulate the notion of community of life. What is a community of life? What is the community of life? How do we relate to the community of life? It was actually the first international instrument that articulated that notion of community of life. So in the previous presentation by Tobin, he shared with us about the importance of imagination. So sometimes crafting ideas into words also stimulate our imagination in terms of community of life. It's already something that invites us to think about what that means. So at the core of the Earth Charter really lies an ethic of care and respect for the community of life. The second part of it is around principles around ecological integrity. The third part of it is our 4 principles around social and economic justice. And the fourth part is articulates a number of principles around democracy, nonviolence, and peace. So this gives you a gist of the content of this ethical, or the world vision that is articulated in the Earth Charter. But the Earth Charter is really seen as an ethical compass, or can be seen as an ethical compass. What's the purpose of a compass? It gives us direction, to navigate through the difficult decisions we have as an individuals, as institutions, to navigate through the difficult dilemmas, ethical dilemmas we have in our decision-making. We could use something like an ethical compass such as the Earth Charter. So a couple of things in terms of what we find in it is the notion of responsibility and the notion of Earth community. We are one Earth community. So just trying to cultivate that feeling and that thinking through our upbringing is different from what is cultivated in many mainstream education systems. Responsibility with the Earth community, the sense of responsibility. The cloud that you have there is an invitation for us to think. It's an invitation for us to imagine. How does that look like? How does that look like if we were to have responsibility at that level with the Earth community, a sense of responsibility? This notion of care, the notion of respect and care, can we nurture that through our upbringing? Can we nurture a sense of respect and care for the community of life? So to kind of amplify the notion of respect, not only with my family, not only among my local community, but expand the notion of respect and care to the large living world, to the community of life on Earth. But not only that, it adds or articulates words of care and respect with understanding, compassion, and love. Again, it's the only international instrument that really articulates the word compassion and love. And it took people 3 to 5 years to articulate that language there. There's a lot of history behind why compassion is there, why understanding. And I have to say that actually I had some difficulties with that at the beginning because I thought we just have to love, we just have to care. And I think it was only when I read the book from Erich Fromm, The Art of Loving, it helped me to understand this better. The Art of Loving from Erich Fromm helped me. And also when I saw my mother taking care of my grandmother. Because we can take care with a lot of love to an elder person, but if we don't understand, we actually can create more injury. We have to care with understanding of what that person needs and how to care. You know? So, anyway, so that's principle 2 of the Earth Charter. I won't take too much time on it. So principle 16F, which is the last principle of the Earth Charter, it's really an invitation for all of us to recognize that peace is the holiness created by the right relationships with oneself, other persons, other cultures, other life, Earth, and the larger whole of which we're all part. It's kind of a process. It invites us to go through a process to really think about how are we relating to our own selves? How am I, Mirian, relating to myself? Am I caring? Am I taking care of myself, for instance? How am I relating to other persons? How are you, how are we relating to the large living world? So it's like in this constant ongoing quest, in questioning, can I improve the way in which I'm relating to the large living world, not only among human beings? So the whole process is really inviting us to change the way we see things, or to expand our notion of care and respect, to expand the borders. Again, coming back to this experience of the generation that lived in Brazil in 1850, that changed their perspective, that dared to change their worldview, that slavery was not right, was not a good thing. What are those things that our current culture, even our tradition values, need to change? So anyway, the process is really, this whole process of values-based education through the lenses of the Earth Charter, or values-based education around sustainability values, is really an invitation to change the way we perceive ourselves in the world we are, to change the way we relate to others, moving from an anthropocentric approach to a more life-centered approach. Moving, because we have been learning that human beings are at the center. You know, the most important thing is to solve the problems of human beings. Before it was even the most important thing is to solve the problem of a certain caste, of a certain group of society. So it's moving away from this egocentric and selfish approach or anthropocentric approach to life into something that is more embracing the community of life. We are part of a community of life. One other notion that we see there is the importance to promote this notion of being more. Being more what? Being more rather than having more. We have been taught, many young people are going through school because they want to have more. I want to have a better car. I want to have a better house. I want to have more so that I can travel more. Rather than I'm going through my upbringing because I want to be a better human being, a more compassionate human being. So the Earth Charter articulates this notion that we must realize that when basic needs have been met, human development is primarily about being more, not having more. So, but values-based education is really something that in this community here, it rings the bell and people feel well, but the reality is that even in the university where I come from, and most universities, most schools around the world, and in policy making, it's not very easy. It's not very welcoming. And I think we all know that, right? Depending on where we are in the world, it's even more difficult. So we do hear in many political speeches, discourses, especially when governments are towards elections, that they say we need to promote more ethical leadership, we need to promote more values. But when it comes to really infusing values in education processes, it actually, people get scared. And the reason I'm just going to share, so there's different perceptions. I would say most of them are misperceptions. One is values-based education is often perceived as religious education, but we know it's not always the case, but we need to flag that. Values-based education is carried, so there's a perception that values-based education is carried out with a vertical, authoritarian, transmissive way, like open your mouth and eat those values, and you have to process it in a kind of vertical way, in a transmissive way, also limited to theory and often disconnected from reality. But we know it's not always the case. It's not the only way to do values-based education. But we need to acknowledge that there is a misperception out there that people are scared to do values-based education because of these misperceptions, right? Values clarification, so people see or consider that values clarification and examination of reflection around values is considered as superfluous, useless, abstract. But actually, our values are reflected in our decisions, in our everyday life. They're reflected in our behavior. Some people consider that the study of values or ethics belong exclusively to the domain of the experts in ethics, philosophers, scholars in religion. But we actually know it's a subject that is everywhere. So we need to acknowledge these misperceptions that are actually putting a wall in values-based education in many places around the world. Actually, I think in the majority of places in schools, universities and schools. So to counteract those perceptions, we have been, in our research and work of the past 20 years, we have been looking at what are the key pedagogical elements for values-based education through the lenses of the Earth Charter, so that people are not going to perceive that in the way that many people perceive values-based education, right? Vertical, transmissive, theoretical, and etc. So I'm going to quickly share with you, I'm just going to check the time here. Okay, I'm almost done. Some examples of, so over the past 20 years, there has been many schools, primary, secondary schools, universities, and a number of non-formal education groups that have been using their charter as an educational instrument to promote a culture of sustainability and global citizenship. So I have gone through 116 experiences and studied them, 30 stories in primary and secondary education, 23 examples in higher education, so universities, 63 non-formal. Many of them are published in many publications that are available online. So I'll just give you some examples of them here. These are publications that you can find online. Each one of them offers a collection of experiences on education for sustainability through the lenses of the Earth Charter. So, for instance, the last one on the right-hand side is a journal on education for sustainable development. It was published in 2010. It offers a number of reflections and examples of when the Earth Charter is used in education. The one next to it that has an orange bottom, it's called the Heart of the Matter in terms of education for sustainability. It offers a collection of 19 experiences on education for sustainable development. The one in the middle, we did it together with UNESCO. It offers a collection of 27 stories of good practices with the Earth Charter in education, and so forth. So I'm just sharing with you where you can find these over 116 stories. Very briefly, I will show you just 3 examples of schools that are using their charter as an instrument, as an educational or ethical reference to cultivate these values of sustainability. They're all available online, by the way. There are some interviews or short videos on YouTube that these schools share how they are doing that. And these are just examples of 3 schools. Avon Earth Charter School in the UK, Jurusti School in Costa Rica, and Seuna School in Costa Rica. I know this, of course, very well because I have been visiting these schools for many years. But I'm going to share with you the findings in terms of how. What are the pedagogical elements that these schools are doing? But we also have examples of universities. So, for instance, the Methodist University in São Paulo, Brazil, Granada University in Spain. They have a whole, actually, Granada University in Spain and University of Crete in Greece. They are very similar. They have been really doing research on the cognitive and emotional, the relationship of our emotional self in learning. They are doing this whole infusing values education through experience, but also in terms of reflection with the head and the heart and the hand, something that we have heard this morning quite a lot. The Methodist University in Brazil is an example of whole institutional approach. Remember I showed before the wheels that UNESCO has been promoting, the whole institutional approach, and the Methodist University has that. FGCU, the Florida Golf Course University that is based in Fort Myers in Florida, has been working for the past almost 20 years with the Earth Charter, infusing it also as something that it's very much central to as a whole institutional approach for that university in terms of how the university is organized, how do they do their operations, the management, even the physical space, how they're building. They're looking at how sustainability values can guide even the way the university is built. So many of them are doing, many of these examples, the 116 examples that I've been studying, are doing this, right? So this is basically to show that values-based education through the lenses of the Earth Charter is already being done. It's practice. It's being practiced in a known vertical way. It's being practiced in a known theoretical, abstract way, right? It's being practiced involving the mind, the heart, and the hands. So basically, these stories show that it can be done. So I'll briefly share with you 7 elements that we have found through this research on the 20 years of many different groups using the Earth Charter in education. The first one has to do with the human connection, relationships, establishing relationships. Now, why that is not happening in the mainstream education? Maybe because many teachers are getting to school very tired. Maybe they're too attached to their content. You know, when you study something, you're a biologist or you're, I don't know, mathematics, which one? Mathematics teacher, you are in love with the mathematics. You know, the mathematics is what I love the most, or English is what I love the most. And you are so attached to your content, you forget to see the individual that is in front of you, right? And what we have seen is that relationship is much more important than the content. So that human connection that is established can transform a human being forever. And I would like to share, to illustrate that, I want to share with you my own story. As 8 years old, I was 8 years old, I was going to my school, very sad that day. Sad because my parents told me that they were going to divorce. I couldn't understand that, I was just sad. I was not feeling well. When I came to school, my teacher, Elizabeth, immediately saw me. She saw that something was wrong, going wrong in me, my system. So she probably had planned a whole thing, like mathematics, language, Portuguese. No, my mother tongue is Portuguese, so I have to teach mathematics. I have to teach so much Portuguese today. But she was able to set aside for a little while that pile of content she had to give the kids, set aside and pick that moment that was so important to me. So what she did, she saw, she hugged me and took me in her arms. I cannot remember the words she said, but I do remember her eyes, her smile, and how that hug felt to me. So I can assure you that that moment is permanent in my life since my 8 years old. So I'm 50, so you can count. For how many years that teacher really impacted my life. Not only in that moment, but throughout my life. So how many opportunities each one of you has in your everyday life to impact the life of that individual, be a kid, be even a teenager or an adult. But what the teacher has to see is, before seeing the content and the curriculum and the many things that needs to be done, sometimes we need to put things aside and just grasp that moment. And I trust each one of you have had a moment in your upbringing. It doesn't need to be just when you were a child, but can be also as an adult. A moment that you either generated as a child, or as a student, or as a teacher. Those moments that it's there. So the first element is this human connection, the importance to establish human relationship and contact. The importance to bring the classroom outside. So there's so much information and knowledge that our mental health, our emotions are improved when we just go outside for a little while. Go to the tree, go next to a garden, just go outside, look at the sky. So why can't we teach biology, math, English for a little while outside? So that we provide a space for people to connect better with nature. The pedagogy in Portuguese we call it a pedagogia da pergunta, the inquiry. So offering spaces for the students to ask questions. And to ask questions and also not only be looking for the answers, but just to be okay in living around the questioning. So many of us know about dialogue, having dialogue around difficult decisions, dialogue about what is driving our decisions. Deep dialogue that really go into, I think blue, you think white, why? I go left, you go right, why? We see a cockroach, what do you do? By the way, if you see a cockroach in your kitchen, what do you do? Why do you do that? Let's dialogue about it. So offering the space for that kind of things. The aesthetics of the place. So for instance, can we dare to to organize our classroom in a circle? Anyway, I don't have time to go through this. This one is on the elements on holistic education that really brings our whole selves. Not only focusing on the student, the students, the physical well-being, the mental well-being, the spiritual well-being, and the cognitive side of the student, but also the teacher. Because the teacher is the first one that needs to come feeling good about that day so that you can generate something good energy. Last one is bringing values-based education through arts and storytelling. So we have been doing that for over 15 years. I have been seeing so many examples of people that are really offering the space, again, not only for children, but for adults. I mean, in a university settings. By the way, how many schools, teachers, and principals are here? Can you just raise your hand so that I see who work in a primary and secondary school environment? Yeah, okay. Thank you. Anyone from a university who is in a university, in the field of university? Okay, thank you. I'm saying this because sometimes we talk about values-based education and bringing storytelling or arts, and we can easily relate to that to children, schools, but I'm actually, and that's good and right, and I encourage that, but I'm also daring to think that universities, I mean, if you're teaching English, or if you're teaching law, or if you're teaching business, in university settings, we can do values-based education through storytelling and through the use of arts in a wonderful and transformative way. So art, at least in my side of the world, has been taken away from our curriculum, totally. But you do not need to be an art teacher to use art in your teaching. You can be a language teacher, you can be a biologist teacher, and use art, the language of art in your education practice. So through this 116 stories that I have been looking at of different groups that are using their charter as an instrument in education, we have seen all these 7 elements quite often. And I'm sharing this with you because I think these are key elements that can help to bring sustainability values in education into the classroom. These are other elements that are complementary to that. I just want to share one more thing. Here, I'm about to finish, is that there are a number of resources that you can find online. A guide for using their study in education. The second one there with the children is because the government of Costa Rica in 2003, they have established values-based education as at the core of the curriculum, as a cross-cutting theme in the curriculum. Quite interesting. Okay, and for that matter, we have put together this material, which is actually a teacher guide that really focuses on the importance of reflection, action, reflection, offering the space for experiencing and into education. I'm going to close here. Although just one more so that I can see. Oh, okay. This one offered also, or emphasized the importance of illustration. So you can find this in the teacher guidebook. The use of image and illustrations to generate a dialogue around values. Illustrate through, by the illustration of a daily life situation can generate a lot of dialogue for kids. Let me just end by sharing that I think the most important thing around this effort to infuse values education in our teaching practice is by modeling. The school, the teacher, needs to reflect the values that we are trying to promote. So if we are talking about the values of sustainability and global citizenship that is around respect and care for the community of life, we need to reflect that in not only in how and what happens in the school, in the classroom, but how we relate to one another in the classrooms. A dropper, we should look at ourselves as a dropper. You know what the function of a dropper is? To dosify, not to give too much, not too little, but to dosify. Dropper. I see myself, and I invite to see yourself to see dropper. in that space. I see us as a dropper. And the importance of a teacher also to be the light, to show the light in those key moments, as I had my moment with my Elizabeth teacher, that you grasp those moments to show the light, to be the light to that human being life that is in front of you. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Vilela. Thank you. We have time for 2 questions. Yes.
Good evening to all of you. I'm Jayashree Venkatesh from the Department of Apparel Technology and Management. And I teach design and costume and artistic skills. My question to you is, you said the teacher has to be a reflection. She has to be like a role model. But the challenge I feel in today's, and since I'm in a higher education sector, is the impact of technology. So now how do we challenge technology and still retain the values and make the students understand that value is equally important?
Did I understand that it's the challenge of how to deal with technology? I don't know. I have a 15-year-old daughter that is pretty much, and I think most teenagers and young people are pretty much focused in technology. I think we cannot block it. We have to find ways to embrace it and go with it, rather than it's part of the new generation. They were born like that, and that's technology. I think, how can we look at the good side of technology and guide, I guess, I would say the principle of Aikido. You know, Aikido has a way to use the force in a positive way. So I would use the Aikido principle to answer that question.
Thank you. One more question. The last question, madam. Thank you.
Thank you, salutations for your wonderful presentation. I'm Shobha Mangoli. I'm a clinical psychologist by profession. I have a little different question to ask. The whole presentation was about the role of education. I understand the conference, but somewhere we need to address what is the role of parents in cultivating or inculcating values in the children. Because value, I feel strongly, is a combination of what the parents give, then what the teachers give, and then what the society and the socio-political, economic systems give to the child in terms of experiences. So if you could just give from the Earth Charter or your personal view on what could be the role of the parent. I know it's a huge role, but just your viewpoint of what could be the role of a parent. Thank you.
I think it's a collaboration between the parents and the school. But the reality is that many children do not receive many things from their parents. No? Parents are busy, they are tired. Of course, cultivating, nurturing values for good coexistence in our world needs to come from all different angles. Hopefully from all angles, but sometimes we do not have it among our friends. Sometimes we do not see that reflected in our family, or sometimes we do not see that reflected in the schools. But of course, we would encourage that it comes from all angles. It's very important, obviously, the role of parents. But it's something that the education system cannot I guess, control. Actually, the education system cannot even control much what goes on in the classrooms, but let alone what goes on in the family houses. Thank you.
Thank you, madam. Thank you, Professor Mirian Vilela. I now request Ms. Mona Mehta, member of Sai Anugraha Foundation from the United Kingdom, to honor our speaker. Thank you very much, Professor. I think this is one of the most important things in today's world, sustainability, and the way they have integrated together in terms of developing this charter and making it into objective values is so commendable. So we can use those later on. Probably all the videos are on YouTube in the Sai Vrunda website. You can look at it again and even take snaps from there or screenshots from there to use further in your own institutions. So we now have tea and coffee being served outside. Request the delegates and the audience and the students to just step out, and towards the entrance of Premamrutham, you have tea and biscuits being served. The speakers as well as the panelists request you all to come backstage because you'll be led to the other building where you had lunch this afternoon for your tea and snacks. Thank you very much. And this evening, Swami is expected to come here at 6:05, 6:10, before 6:15. So request all of you to just be back here 10 to 6. Would that be reasonable? 10 to 6, so we have more than 50 minutes from now. So thank you very much. Tea and biscuits, and back by 10 to 6.